Before AVI, there was OSB. Before OSB, there was the Volunteer Graduate Scheme to Indonesia, which started as an expression of solidarity with the newly independent people of Indonesia. It was responding to an invitation from Indonesians for Australians to work with them in their country, living their kind of lifestyle and working under their direction. And that, in a sense, is what characterises the volunteer experience.
When I came to the organisation in the 60s, I came out of an organisation which was very much about experiential learning. And the idea was that people must take responsibility for their own lives and you build from the grassroots up. And when I came across the Overseas Service Bureau and the Volunteer Graduate Scheme, those two philosophies came together for me.
The Overseas Service Bureau was set up by some of the same people involved in the Volunteer Graduate Scheme and embodied those same principles, and it was set up to expand a program like that to more countries than Indonesia. So it very quickly expanded in terms of number of countries, numbers of volunteers, diversification of activities, many projects were being run, and it was also a time of innovation.
The program has expanded greatly, not only since 1951, but particularly over the last 20 years, where we've seen a significant increase in the number of volunteers and a range of work that the volunteers do. We've also seen significant development in our in-country offices, our in-country team capacity and our ability to support partner organisations.
AVI was developing their country offices overseas. I was heavily involved in the training of local staff in Solomon Islands, PNG and Fiji, as well as the North Pacific, as more officers recruited staff.
Australian Volunteers International were setting up offices around the world at that point, so the opportunity to actually go over there and start to look at how we would establish a presence in the Middle East, and having the opportunity to negotiate with the government of Jordan on how we would set up an office and get registration and look at the most effective way for us to work in those contexts was a big learning and a big responsibility to look at how we would establish ourselves and what our role was, you know, what the specific need was and why we were setting up an office, not just to assume that was the best thing to do.
The Volunteer Graduate Scheme was very much about being amongst the people, you know, living the life that the people that you were working with lived. So there was nothing lavish about it. And there was a determination as people were recruited into the scheme to only recruit people that were capable of embracing that kind of ethos. So they weren't looking for people that thought they had the answers. They were looking for people that had a learning attitude.
AVI is a development organisation because the philosophy that it was set up on is not going and helping people and doing things to people or for people. It's going and working with people and walking alongside people.
We have to know how to help the people. You cannot just bulldoze yourself into a situation. You cannot be dogmatic, cannot be arrogant. So you have to know how to win over, if not the respect, if not the trust, at least the agreement of the people in charge, so that you can do work and deliver aid to the people. The AVI was very unique in that regard. They start with training in Melbourne, introduction to the country, to the culture, to the politics, to the sociology, economics. They learn about about sensitivities of cultural differences, to always let local people in the communities to be on the driver's seat, to empower them, to support them, and not trying to lead them.
AVI's approach to partnerships, mainly through mutual respect and listening, is critical because the decisions about what to improve, where to build capacity and what kind of future you're creating on the ground is the decision for those organisations and their community. It's not our decision to make. We don't understand the community in the same way that they do locally.
Change has to come from locally identified needs with locally identified solutions. And with the mobilisation of international volunteers, we can support that change, but we should never be trying to lead that change or force that change.
What I learned from those programs about effective development was the need to walk alongside local staff and not just to focus on the immediate intervention, not just to focus on the short-term training, but doing it in the long term. Because you're so inspired by what local teams, local organisations are doing on the ground every day, and then the privilege of being able to bring in Australians who had technical expertise that were needed on the ground, that was fantastic.
In January 1975, I was assigned to go to the Goroka Hospital to be in charge of the pathology lab there as a medical laboratory scientist. And you know, we would have some very, very sick children, very hard to bleed them, learning so much from my Papua New Guinean colleagues in the lab. I had an old man Waiyaki who didn't speak English, who worked in the lab in his bare feet, but he could take blood out of a stone. And so being able to diagnose their diseases and treat them so that they would live, what a privilege and what a joy for me.
One particular memory that comes to mind was the work that we did in Lebanon. Watching their playgroups develop that went from having a physiotherapist to an occupational therapist to a youth worker was really great, and it increased a sense of solidarity because people are living in really difficult situations, and we had volunteers living in the refugee camp. They weren't flying in and staying in a fancy apartment in downtown Beirut. They were living side by side with not only their colleagues but also the people they were there to help.
Localization is key to development, and through our programs, you know, we ask our partner organizations, what do you want from us?
We are bringing partners into the program as equal partners. They are facilitators at workshops, they are leading on events and activities, and we are more and more we're seeking to get the input from our partner organizations about what they want, what they need, and how they want that delivered.
Sebagai lembaga penelitian independen, tujuan Semeru adalah mendorong perumusan kebijakan berbasis bukti yang pro masyarakat miskin dan inklusif.
Semeru telah bermitra dengan AVI selama 20 tahun, sejak tahun 2001, dan kami telah menerima lebih dari 20 sukarelawan Australia sejak saat itu.
Hubungannya ya, kalau hubungan kerjanya hubungan kerja yang profesional, tapi di sisi lain juga ada hubungan yang merupakan hubungan personal ya, pertemanan, karena memang di Semeru itu kita budayanya kekeluargaan gitu ya, dan biasanya volunteer itu dapat beradaptasi dengan cepat.
Our volunteers, many still have links to their communities and the people that they have worked with, and continue to maintain those relationships years after they have been in country.
One of the greatest highlights were the friendships I forged in that time, and those have remained friends for more than 45 years now.
The most memorable thing for me was the quality of the staff that I worked with and the volunteers that went away. They were people who came to the organisation because they wanted to work in this field. They were people who were committed to this form of development.
The volunteers of AVI are also diplomats, mediators. bridge builders, and they do fantastic work. Today, in the context of Southeast Asia, Timor-Leste is an oasis of peace, of tranquility. And you contributed to that. We couldn't have done alone.
The benefits to Australia in these kinds of programs are immense. It's in terms of the relationships and the understanding through people-to-people contact. And the volunteer program is a really strong way of building that. And recognising that, this is not necessarily the best of all possible worlds. There are things we can learn from other people and other places.
One of the things that I loved was to recognise that there was a strategic advantage for Australia in closer ties with the Middle East, and using that to build those closer ties as well as support the local population. So there was mutual advantage there, because the more we learn about the Middle East and the more we have Australians understanding the Middle East, the less we are likely to stereotype it, dismiss it, or not understand it.
Working with AVI brings a range of different values, both professionally and personally. But I think what it's taught me most is the value of not judging people, the value of sitting down with people, understanding what their story is, and appreciating what they do within their communities.
The experiences that I had, the understanding about people, the friendships I formed are immeasurable, and I wouldn't trade that.
People are at the essence of everything we do at AVI. It is the recognition of how important relationships are, whether that be in country or in Australia, or with the partners, the communities, our staff, or anyone that we work with.
Ya, kalau pesan saya sih jangan kehilangan kesempatan ya untuk bekerja dengan AVI, karena menurut saya AVI itu lembaga sukarelawan internasional yang terpercaya dan profesional ya, saya sudah buktikan.
Everyone has a human right to determine how they live and how their community lives.
It's very clear through the work that we do today. The foundations were laid in the basic values and principles that were put in place in 1951. And that was around partnership, it was around respect, it was around relationships, and that very much remains today.
It was curiosity. We really wanted to know. We wanted to know our neighbours, we wanted to know what made them tick, and we wanted to share in their life. You can only be a good volunteer if you want to learn.
The word volunteer conjures up someone doing things for nothing. That's not what volunteering's about. Volunteering is about going and living and working alongside and being alongside people of a different culture and learning from them and working with them. People who in the main understand they're not going there to change the world for these people, but it'll change their world.